There are only two things in life that are certain, which are death and taxes. Not that I want to make fun of Ben Franklin's quote or arrange it in any way, but I think there's a third component that is lacking in that particular phrase. I think it's change. Change is inevitable. Change will happen. We live in a constantly changing world, whether it's technology that changes each year, whether it's the seasons that change or are supposed to change 4 times a year, whether it's friends that change throughout your life. Change can make us, change can break us, but it's not the change that's important. What is important is how we react to that change. As many of you know, the city of Danville was founded on 2 major industries, textile and tobacco. Dan River Mills established its footprint within our community in the late 1800s and was a mainstay for over 100 years. In its heyday, which was around the 1940s, they employed over 14,000 people just within the city limits of Danville. Now, mind you, the city itself only had 32,000 people at that time. So you can only imagine the impact it had on the daily lives of residents, the impact it had on the city's revenue generation. The other major industry, tobacco, we were known as the world's best tobacco market. So Brightlift Tobacco was grown in the communities and the counties around the city of Danville and brought in to the city for processing and auctioning. We still have a radio station with those call letters, WBTN. We all know, beginning in the 1990s, how affected or impacted a lot of communities were around the nation due to globalization. We were a community with manufacturers that relied on a lot of labor, and it was a lot of manual processes. And at that point in time, manufacturers were looking for a low-cost alternative. They had to meet customer demand to lower commodity pricing, and through that, they found cheaper labor in Asia, in Mexico, and South America. So you can only imagine what was going through the heads of leaders at that time. Things were changing, and things were changing very fast. Between 1990 and 2006, the city of Danville itself lost almost 6,000 jobs. Guess what happened in 2007? We entered into a recession, which lasted until 2009. If you look at our region as a whole, we lost 25,000 jobs during that period of time, from 1990 to 2009. That was 11% of our population. What were we to do? How do we adapt to change? And I'm so thankful that regional leaders decided, instead of giving up and just accepting the fate that was put before us, we decided to reinvest in ourselves. We decided to reinvent ourselves as a region. One way of reinventing ourselves was the reinvestment in a number of assets. I always tell clients, we take the approach of asking one question: how can you convince the private sector or you as an individual to invest in your community if you as a community are not investing in yourself? So the first area of focus was infrastructure development. In the 1990s, our Industrial Development Authority began investing in the creation of shell buildings. So these are 4 walls and a gravel floor, but guess what? It reduces a company's speed into our market. So thankfully today, due to that investment, some of our major employers are now housed within those facilities, so it did help us attract new industry into the community. We started investing in infrastructure, such as broadband. We're in a rural area of Virginia. Who would have thought that we have a trunk line of fiber running straight through our city that has access to over 1 terabyte worth of speed? And for those of you who had kids in school this past year, you can understand how access to internet services are incredibly important. And finally, a great example of regional cooperation and regional investment was in land development. Throughout the region, we started investing in preparing sites. We call them shovel-ready sites, in order to let industry reduce their time period in order to make it to market. A great example would be the Southern Virginia mega site. The city of Danville and Pittsylvania County collaborated, worked together, and invested together in a 3,500 acre site in the county. which is close to the North Carolina border. Through partnerships through the Tobacco Commission, through our private sector utilities providers, we were able to establish a site that is one of the largest sites that's certified on the East Coast. This can house a major transformational project and its suppliers for our community. A partnership that I would like to highlight, as you know, in economic development, we get pretty competitive with one another, whether it's through communities or between states. But as a community that went through such major loss, we understand the importance of regionalism. So what happens in our community is good for the region as a whole. What happens in the neighboring community is good for the residents within ours. So we support however we can either way, regardless of where a project will be going. Understanding that this was close to the North Carolina border, and understanding that residents within North Carolina will benefit from jobs created on the site. There will be additional residential development and even commercial development across the state line due to the end result of the site. The City of Eden, Rockingham County, and the state of North Carolina invested in infrastructure to help serve this site. You don't hear of two states working together, or communities in two states working together very often. Now, the number one request when we're working with manufacturers or any job creators when they're looking to locate a new facility is, where will I be able to access skilled workforce? So understanding that this is of key importance, 10 years ago we began investing in workforce development programs. In fact, we've invested as a region over $50 million in developing a 3-tiered system. You'll see in this picture that these are middle schoolers. So we start workforce development, we start talent development at the age of 11 and at the ages of 11 and 12 years. So 5th graders and 6th graders are entering into Career Connections labs where they're exposed to 9 different career paths. They're learning how to code using Raspberry Pi. They're learning how to weld using virtual welders. They're learning how to machine a piece of metal using tabletop CNC machines. All applied, hands-on learning. And they're able to understand the end career paths associated with each of these technologies. When they enter into high school, they're able to access dual enrollment programs where they earn college credits. By the time they graduate high school, they have the equivalent of 1 year's worth of college credits under their belt and a number of industry credentials. What we've seen in this process is when you provide applied learning, hands-on learning to students, it makes the traditional courses more relevant. So now they understand the importance of your writing and communication skills. They understand the importance of taking algebra and geometry classes. And as a result, we're seeing an increase in their passing rate for the standards of learning tests. Students who go through this program have a 99% passing rate for those standardized tests. They can automatically enter into a 3rd-year program at Danville Community College. So within 1 year at Danville Community College, they're able to get an associate's degree and again, stack those industry credentials. Should they want a 4th-year program, there is a Capstone Program available at the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research. What's interesting about this particular program is that it is set up like a manufacturing floor. So they're able to learn each and every component of how a company should operate and how each and every decision they make impacts the bottom line for a company. So they can be the plant manager one day or they can grab the tool the next day. They learn every component. The instructors are pretty ingenious because they can throw some interesting curveballs into the educational system or into the workflow process. So perhaps there's a last-minute customer change to the order. Well, the kids now have to, or the students I should say, now have to collaborate with one another. They need to think about how to resolve this problem. So they're really honing in on their soft skills, their critical thinking skills through this. As a result, we've become, as a region, the national standard for workforce development initiatives. We've actually had a company, and I won't name the state, in another state, bring their governor. They flew their governor here on a private jet to take a look at our workforce development programs. and said, if you cannot replicate this, I will move my company out of your state. So again, going back to how skilled workforce is of key importance. Now let's go back to 2008, to the very glim story that I'd shared with you. And understanding, going back to 25,000 jobs lost, 11% of the population. So every business that we could recruit to the community, every job we could create, every ounce of revenue that we could bring back into our system was of key importance. It still is of key importance, but it was very important at that point in time. And our office, and forgive me, this is a story that was passed down from a previous director prior to my time in the office. We were working with a Canadian manufacturing company to locate to our community. The owner and his wife flew into Greensboro, drove up 29, and they were headed over to City Hall to meet with our office to talk about opportunities within the community. They took one look at our downtown. The downtown looked like this picture. It was vacant. It was blighted. Not a lot of activity going on. And the wife looked over at the husband and said, there is no way that I will live in this community. Just think, downtowns, we didn't focus on lifestyle amenities. We didn't focus on quality of life amenities within our office. We didn't understand that it was a part of economic development, but it certainly is. Making sure that your downtown is active and healthy and thriving makes the first impression on how the rest of your community is perceived. So if we're not investing in that core, that urban core, what does that say about how we're investing in the rest of our community? So we did take a trip down to Greenville, South Carolina, which had a very similar textile background, but did a great job in revitalizing itself, and did a great job in downtown redevelopment. They started about 20 years before we did. And we brought back pieces of advice and strategies, and we created a master plan for how to redevelop this area. And as you can see in these pictures, some before and afters, things quickly changed. We went from a blighted, boarded up area of town that no one wanted to visit and people didn't feel safe in, to what's now the most energetic component of our community. We have residents living in this district. We have new businesses such as restaurants and retailers that have now opened and are thriving. We have 750 apartments that are staying nearly 100% occupied. So this has become a very energetic piece of our puzzle. And it's important to the retention of residents, and it's important to the attraction of new residents into the community. As a result, just since 2011, we've invested over $35 million in public investments, or public projects just within this area. However, as a result, we've seen over $175 million of investment from the private sector. Quite a bit of change, right? Because of these investments, because we had regional leaders beginning in the 90s and into the 2000s that wanted to make these strategic investments, wanted to reinvent the community, wanted to change the way of life for a number of our residents, and access to quality family wage jobs, we have been able to garner the attention of industry across the globe. Just within the past 3 years, from 2018 until now, we have seen over $650 million committed to our region, which will result in over 3,400 jobs. In addition, we've garnered, our story has been shared around the globe, and we've garnered attention from companies that represent 9 countries, which is, I don't think a lot of folks understand the global representation within our market, something that we're incredibly proud of. We've also have been recognized for our strategic efforts. So FDI, Foreign Direct Investment Magazine, which is part of the Financial Times, ranked us as one of the top 10 communities for economic potential based off of foreign direct investment into the city of Danville. Just last year, Site Selection Magazine ranked Danville as one of the top 10 micropolitan communities in the entire United States. Because of our regional collaboration, our regional efforts and partnerships, 2 organizations, the Virginia Economic Developers Association and the Southern Economic Development Council, provided us with an award this year to highlight those regional partnerships. And finally, as many of you all have known, this year we were given the prestigious title of an All-American City. Now, I'll end on a story that happened, an interaction that happened this past week. I had the opportunity to show a development team around our community, and just to see where their interests lie, where they would be able to invest. And as you're driving around, you have time to share your story with one another. And understanding I was from Danville originally, I had moved out to a large city on the West Coast. He looked at me and he was like, "Well, you're young." Yes. And he was like, "Well, why did you move back?" And I told him honestly, when I moved back, when I decided to make that trip back to the East Coast, my intention was not to live in my hometown. I was going to come back, take 2 months off, and find a job in Northern Virginia. But then, it's almost immediately, I started running into people, leaders within the community, who wanted to hear my opinion on what I thought we should do in the city of Danville or within the region. They wanted me to participate on boards and committees. They wanted me to be involved in this change. And I told them there was an energy that in this community that I had not felt before. There was some form of excitement happening and bubbling. And I guess fast forward 12 years later, I found a career that I love, and I am so thankful that those regional leaders wanted and encouraged change makers to come back to their community. I must say, I wake up every day and I am so thankful for our leadership and their continued commitment, not just a one-time commitment in reinvesting in our community, but their continued stomach for risk, but their continued investment in workforce development and quality of life amenities, and really helping us transition from that former mill economy into a global economy.